Hey everyone, I'm going to be having a shorter live stream today, and I am a little bit early as well. I am in a different part of the country, and I'm several hours behind, so I'm just going to do what I can here. I'm going to go straight to answering some viewer questions and comments. There are a lot from my Consciousness is Not Ultimate Reality video, so let's get right into it here. And again, if you have any questions or follow ups to what I answer here, feel free to ask. So this first comment says, I'm not going to give the names here just to help give some confidentiality, but the first comment says, you say the science, the data, the research is inconclusive about whether consciousness is primary. When you say this, you are ignoring the data willfully or in ignorance. There are mountains of data pointing to consciousness being primary, at least more primary than the body and more primary than matter. Perhaps start with the work of, okay, I'll stop there. So, this is an argument that has been surfacing more and more, especially as we've gotten better at highlighting the limits of materialist or reductionistic approaches. There's a logical error here. If we're saying that there's limitations for materialism or reductionism, that doesn't necessarily mean that the opposite side, idealism or consciousness being fundamental, is correct. It just means that there are limitations for the side of materialism. So when I see these types of comments, I encourage people to go directly to their own experience, because otherwise we are arguing intellectualized points of view. And we can go back and forth on that forever. I could do it right now with the consciousness side. Instead of doing that, I pointed this individual to my upcoming book, The Psychology of Awakening. I spent hundreds of pages some of these arguments, and overall, I come to the conclusion that it is best to just verify with your own experience. The reason for this is because whether you argue consciousness is primary or materialism is primary, they are both intellectualized points of view. This is exactly what I said in the video as well. When you're dealing with the intellect, you're dealing with the mind. The mind provides a small perspective of what is real. So whether you argue consciousness, whether you argue materialism, you're going to be stuck within that game to begin with. When you take the perspective of, not the perspective, but when you take practices that are direct experience related, you'll find that the words are inadequate to describe what's going on. The intellectualized side is an attempt to describe direct experience, but overall, it is insufficient. So instead of arguing one side or the other, I encourage you to go to direct experience. He goes on to, I'm assuming this is a he from the pictures, he goes on to cite the Vedas, the Upanishads. The undeniable subjective truth is that you cannot experience non-experiencing, which does not prove the primacy of consciousness, but it is what matters. The self seeks to observe itself to discover what it is and whether it is, but that is already a paradox within itself. So, again, these points that are being made here, you could categorize these into an idealistic perspective. Idealism is really good in explaining things that materialism is kind of limited with, but idealism itself, it lacks explanatory power, right? When we say things like Saguna Brahman comes from Nirguna Brahman, and we take these perspectives, they sound really good, but the explanatory power, in other words, the verification piece, it's lacking. At best, what we can get are insights from our own direct practice. And those insights are perhaps what is described through these idealistic practices. And again, that's fine for description, but if you want to go straight to the core, if you want to go straight to what we're talking about here for the psychology of awakening and finding freedom from psychological suffering, you have to let go of both sides. You have to let go of consciousness, you have to let go of materialism, and you just have to go directly into practice. I think the Buddha mentioned this and perhaps argued it best. We have to go beyond views and perspectives and takes. When we say consciousness is fundamental, you have already taken reality and reduced it to consciousness. Again, we could argue this back and forth. I encourage you to go to direct practice. And the important takeaway is, does it work for you? If you are arguing consciousness is fundamental or materialism is fundamental, does that work for you in terms of finding an end to psychological suffering? If it does, then that's great. But from what I've seen, it just leads to more views and more hardships over time. So let's move on from that question here. Okay, there's another question. Are you Indian? That's the first thing it starts with. Well, I guess by blood I am Sri Lankan, but if you are really asking me what I am and you truly get what we're talking about in terms of the psychology of awakening, you'll see that this body, this mind, this constructed identity, it's just a culmination of many different conditions and causes. If we want to identify through these conditions and causes, then yeah, we can describe things through the body. But once you realize ultimate reality and you find these answers for yourself, you will see that this body, this mind, this consciousness, all of it, it's just a depiction of what you truly are. It is within what you truly are. I think Nisar Gatada Maharaj said that best. I am that, right? All these things that we say we are, that is within what you truly are. All right, another comment. Come out of consciousness and try denying consciousness. So, yes, this is a similar perspective to the other comment that I read. Once you take things and you see everything as being pictured within consciousness, that becomes your hammer. Now everything is from the perspective of consciousness. But you forget that consciousness itself, the way you describe it and the way you argue it, these are words, descriptions, and views. These are all within the perspective of your own mind. When you have those perspectives, when you have those own views, it's very hard to see past them. I believe my latest video is an upload of that, describing the problems with views. And if you want to get to a deeper core of what reality is, we have to move past views. I know it's really hard because our minds are so verbally biased that telling someone to think past what they're naturally inclined to do, it's something that a lot of people can't do, at least not with proper practice. Okay, not a single point can be put as solid. This is not a rebuttal or nitpicking, but only that what we cannot even define, you're denying. That's hilarious. Yeah, it is kind of funny because, again, we have to go beyond description. Whether you can describe something, whether you can't describe something, these are all within the realm of descriptions. Ultimate reality, again, I'm using a description here. I have to because I'm talking to you in words. But ultimate reality, as you truly experience it, is beyond description. The moment you put it into words, you lose it. So, what I'm trying to point you towards is, instead of using words and descriptions, go to direct experience. Have you ever experienced without having words plaguing your perspective? Can you just experience without having words or descriptions? If you can, and you can keep your mind silent, now we're getting towards the right spot, right? This perspective of words and views, these are all small, conditional perspectives of what is within what you truly are. Okay. It is not a view at all. You misunderstood the whole thing. I would agree with the first half of that. Yeah, it's beyond view, right? We're not talking about views at all. And consciousness, when we say even the word consciousness, we are talking about a view. We have reduced reality to consciousness. That is a view. I'm encouraging, it's kind of like, I use this in my latest video, but playing a game of tug of war. right? You can pull as hard as you want, the other side will pull back, and it's just an ongoing struggle. But what if you just let go of the rope? Another good example, we use this often in certain types of therapy, the Chinese finger trap, right? You put your fingers in both sides, and when you have the Chinese finger trap and you try to pull, the trap gets tighter and you get stuck, right? When you keep pulling, you get more and more stuck, and then eventually you can't do anything. And as it turns out, the way to get out of a Chinese finger trap is to let go, right? Stop tensioning, stop trying to pull your own view. Just let go of your views. Don't even be in the frame of views. Just completely move on from that perspective. And when you release that tension, now you can take your finger out of the trap. But when you try to pull and control reality and how it's viewed, that's when you get stuck. Once you let go of that sense of control, and as we see in neurobiology, the default mode network is perhaps the best description that we have right now for what this mechanism of control, use of language, and compartmentalizing reality looks like. We have pretty good neurobiological evidence that not only does language and views narrow our view of reality, but it also correlates very well to psychological conditions and issues over time. Because we are taking reality, putting it into a small network of what we understand, kind of like symbols or language, and then we are getting stuck within this smaller view. But we fail to realize that reality is much deeper than what we thought in terms of words or views. Okay, let's see. But isn't saying consciousness isn't the ultimate reality also a view too? Yeah, it is. That's correct. I tried to point this individual in the video to a certain part. I don't remember the timestamp, but yes, I say that multiple times. Ultimate reality is also a view. Whenever I say ultimate reality, I'm using language, right? I'm communicating in words. I'm communicating a view to you. The direct experience, if I was going to teach you in the truest sense, we wouldn't be talking at all. I would just have you directly experience what it is that's going on. That's the most direct way to learn these things. But for most people, that's too difficult, at least up front. If we just sat there, if you just sat with me for 7 days or so and I didn't say anything, I mean, maybe you'll get some insights, but most likely you need some guidance, right? Most people do, unless you're born with certain kinds of gifts or abilities that relate to altered states of consciousness, whether they're biologically induced or some other kind of mechanism, then you're going to need some kind of guidance there. So when I use the term ultimate reality, I'm bringing that up because words like consciousness, or whenever we pull from certain spiritual practices, they are so loaded with certain dogmatisms or underlying definitions that we don't really know what we're talking about. When we say consciousness, there's probably a million different definitions out there, right? I'm going to probably make a video on that in the future. When we even say the word consciousness, what are we talking about, right? We can look at the states of consciousness, we can look at the contents of consciousness. But when we start to point towards consciousness itself, we kind of hit a flat line, right? Because the moment you describe, now you're trying to describe consciousness through its states or contents. Not quite the same thing there. So again, it depends on what we are pointing to here. If we're pointing towards this ultimate reality, then sure, we could use any kind of word, right? We know Nirguna Brahman is a word. Nibbana or Nirvana points in a similar direction. Consciousness could point in a similar direction. I use ultimate reality because it's not as dogmatic, right? When we use this, it's kind of a neutral term. When we look at 10 different spiritual literatures, they could all be pointing towards ultimate reality in their own way. But because they've been around for so long, they will argue with each other and they'll get stuck in those intellectualized points. I'll give you a good example that's still ongoing today. If you look at Advaita Vedanta and you look at Buddhism, they are pointing towards the same ultimate reality, just from two different perspectives. You can't say one is right or one is wrong. Buddhism uses an approach of shunyata, or emptiness, right? The negation of of all the different things that we can perceive or conceptualize with our mind, once you take those away, what is it that remains? Because reality doesn't just magically vanish away. Advaita Vedanta takes the approach of fullness. I believe Purnam is the other word for it. And they encourage you to look at everything as being within your Guna Brahman, right? Or Brahman itself. They are pointing towards the same ultimate reality, but one side is fullness, one side is emptiness, and they're just combating with each other. Do you get the point? That's the main takeaway here, right? Instead of arguing one spirituality or another, I want you to go directly to the core. What are all of these pointing towards? And this is no fault of any spirituality. It's the fault of our own minds. Our minds are really good at simplifying information and then spitting that out in a language that other people can understand. But when we're trying to get to the most fundamental parts of reality, we kind of hit a hard line after a certain point. We have to acknowledge and admit this for ourselves. We're seeing some of these aspects in physics as well, right? When we get down to the core of quantum mechanics or those kinds of components, we're at a flat line, right? Where do we go from there? It seems like observation after a certain point gets stuck in a probability, or at least that's the best we can describe it as. So again, I want you to go beyond descriptions here. I want you to stick to your direct experience. Again, can you experience things without labeling what is going on? Can you just experience? That's a sign of progress. For most people, if you have them sit down and experience something, their mind is going to shoot a bunch of different thoughts out. When those thoughts come out, it's very difficult to control, right? This is the sunset, this is the ocean, this is the water, this is the sand. Can you just observe, right? Can you just observe without reducing reality, cutting it up into the pieces that language tells us? That's what we're trying to get at here, at least for a starting point. Okay, let's go on to the next question here. This one's more of a comment. A load of nothing. Do not waste your time on something that you have no clue about. Before talking about reality, first know yourself. If you don't understand, follow Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta. So again, similar kind of thing here, right? And I've noticed this in certain comments, a bit of an emotional reaction when we talk about these things. For people who are taking my videos serious and are actually interested in what it is I'm trying to share, which is that you can find an end to psychological suffering, you can do it yourself. You don't need to stick to any specific spirituality, religion, or anything anyone tells you. I'm trying to show you that you have this capacity that you can verify for yourself. No magic, no rituals, none of that stuff. You just need the right knowledge and the right practice, and you can verify everything on this channel for yourself. So when I see these types of reactions, especially the more critical or emotional ones, it makes me think the commenter is attached to certain things that I'm talking about, or perhaps even criticizing in the sense that I'm trying to show they're limited, right? Someone who is very attached to Buddhist views, they are going to have difficulties when we talk about the limitations of Buddhist views. And I'm not just attacking Buddhism here. I am trying to show the limitations of every single spirituality, view, scientific practice. There are limits to every single thing we are talking about here. You have to understand this to realize awakening. Because if you adhere to anything, I'm not just going after spirituality here, this is science as well. You have to see that every single one of these, they have in common the human mind, which I have talked about already as being limited. It's not a negative thing, it's just a reality we have to accept. The human mind is limited. It's based in evolutionary principles. It's based in survival, replication, prosperity, whatever it is you want to call. And we have to realize this in order to make progress. Because if you think the human mind can positively identify reality all the way to its most fundamental aspects, you're going to get stuck there. That's what I'm trying to help people realize, right? Our own minds are limited. This isn't a negative thing, it's just a reality. Our own minds are limited. I just want you to realize that for yourself. And as it turns out, when you realize this, you can detach from what it is your mind shapes in terms of reality. And when you do that, you see that there's much more going on than what your mind initially told you. That's the psychology piece. Okay, let's see. What is your book called, good sir? That is The Psychology of Awakening Integrative Approaches for Improving Mental Health. So, my book, this is where I take the deep dive, right? I go through science, I go through spirituality. I try to see where both of these converge in terms of improving mental health. What is it that we can take away that is within science and spiritual practices that we can experientially validate for ourselves? In theory, or perhaps even in practice, if what we're talking about is true and we know the way that science works and we know the way that spirituality works, they should all be pointing in the same direction, right? They're all sourced in the human mind in terms of the observations and what it is that is written down. But if we are trying to explore reality in its truest sense, at the very least, we should see that there's a convergence in terms of what it is that is being pointed to. And that is indeed the case, which is what the book highlights. So I take away what it is that we can find in terms of convergence. I really do my best to stay away from speculation. I'm trained as a psychologist, so I really try to do that. I try to stick with the empirical and what we can validate. And I look at things from a pragmatic view as well as an empirical view. Ideally, we can take both of these together and apply them and validate for ourselves what it is we are talking about. So that's what the book is primarily focused on. The main takeaway, yes, indeed, you can find an end to psychological suffering. I've said this in other videos. The analysis is very simple. If you know the causes of psychological suffering, you also know the solutions for psychological suffering. If you take away the causes, then how could psychological suffering manifest in the first place? That's the type of analysis that tells us there is indeed a way to find an end to psychological suffering. Okay, let's go on here. Okay, I'm going to start in the middle of this comment. I'll listen through your rationale more. Oh, actually, this individual made later comments on the video. Initially, he was saying, I'm not convinced about your statements about materialism, that you can make an absolute statement against materialism. It looks like he ended up watching the entire video and he saw that that was not what I was trying to do. I'm not trying to attack materialism or consciousness idealism in the sense that I'm saying either one is wrong. I'm saying that for materialism and idealism, the answer is still out. The jury is still out. And what I'm trying to point everyone towards is, instead of arguing materialism or idealism, consciousness or material, just drop both of them. Just drop them and go directly to your own experience, right? The truth is, whether materialism is right, whether consciousness is right, whether it's something else, reality as it is, it goes on regardless of whether you know or not from an intellectual basis, and you are it. That is the most important takeaway. If you truly understand and realize this, the whole idea of trying to label is silly, right? Why do we even need to label? We need to label because we want to understand, right? We want to intellectualize. That's a different story. I'm talking about finding an end to psychological suffering. You don't need to label every single experience. If anything, labeling every single experience is one of the causes for psychological suffering. So instead of saying, hey, I'm material and consciousness manifests, or I'm consciousness and material manifests, just drop both of them. You are it regardless, right? That's the ultimate truth here. And that frees you from all these different types of views. It frees you from the anxiety that you don't know what you are. No, you are what you are, and you don't have to know it. You are it. I hope that makes sense. Just because you can't intellectualize something doesn't mean you don't realize the nature of it. That's the takeaway here. People think that if you can't intellectualize something, then you don't get it at all. You could say you don't know it. Know is based in intellect, right? But wisdom, when we talk about wisdom, that's more of an intuitive understanding, right? A deep type of understanding. That's what we're looking for here. Okay, let's do a couple more here. I'm going to have to go a little bit shorter today, and I don't see any comments either. So we'll just do a few more and then we'll wrap things up. But again, if anyone has any questions, please, anything you want to ask, I'm here. I'm happy to help, whatever it is you want. Okay, next comment says here, it is just that it is not logically consistent. If you go and experience beyond consciousness, who is experiencing or cognizant of that experience? So again, another question that is within the perspective of views. It's not that I'm trying to take away consciousness. I'm trying to show you that consciousness, in terms of the way people label it and talk about it, consciousness is a view, right? What are you even talking about when you say consciousness? That's the knowing basis, and the definition part becomes iffy there. Instead of trying to come up with a solid definition, just realize what you are without having to label it. That's the beyond consciousness part. Go beyond this label. If I sit here and say, hey, I'm this body, I am material, I have already reduced what I am to material. If I say I am consciousness, I have already reduced what I am to consciousness. Just be okay with not knowing, because what you are is what you are, regardless, right? You don't have to intellectually know. And I would argue, even if you did intellectually know, that would not give you a finalized answer. Everything we know comes from a smaller perspective, right? Something we've reduced reality to. It's a similar argument to people saying, well, mathematics is the basis of reality. No, it's not, right? Mathematics is our rendition that we can validate as best as possible regarding the nature of reality. If you understand that difference, then you can see how the human mind is limited in any kind of perspective, whether it's math, physics, science, consciousness, psychology. Then you see the limits of all of those things. Okay, let's see here. I really like this comment. I have taught the Dhamma like a raft for the purpose of crossing over, not for holding on to. By understanding the simile of the raft, you should let go even of good teachings. How much more so of wrong teachings? That's perhaps one type of translation for the Alagaddupama Sutta. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. A bit of a mouthful there, but that is an excellent sutta. Sutta is one of the teachings of the Buddha, and yes, I most agree. If you truly understand what we're talking about in this channel regarding awakening, freedom from psychological suffering, any type of teaching in view, you will not attach to, because you see it's a simplified rendition of what you truly are. That applies for everything I'm sharing in this channel as well. But until you realize that, you need some guidance to help lead you in the direction that you need. That's why we're doing this whole thing. That's why Buddha says the same thing there, right? He even says for his own teachings, those are just a raft to get you to where you need to go. And even then, you just leave the raft. You don't take it with you everywhere, right? Exact same thing we're talking about here. And there's some other similar comments to things I've already addressed here. I won't go over those. All right, let's see. I think I'll just go ahead and close things off here. About 30 minutes was what I was going for today. Again, I don't see any questions or comments, so let me just finish by saying this. If you are truly taking away what it is I want to get across in this channel, you are going to get two things from me. The two things you are going to get from me are correct knowledge and correct practice. If you get both of these things, you are going to go and practice the knowledge that you have attained, and you're going to realize the things that are covered in this channel for yourself. If you can do that, that is perfect. That's exactly what I want you to do. I don't want you to come to this channel and just watch things and then be like, oh, cool, interesting point, and then move on with your life. If you really want to find an end to psychological suffering, you have to take this path for yourself. You have to validate what it is we're talking about. I don't want you to accept anything just because I said it or someone else said it. I want you to validate it for yourself. If you feel you've got some correct knowledge, apply it, put it into correct practice, see if it is true and if it holds for you. The core of what this channel is about, it's experiential. It's not an intellectual view that you gain and then you just have some magical perspective on the world. No, it gets down to the core of your very experience, going as far as you can take it in terms of a human, and then realizing the limitations of what your perspectives are, seeing past that, and then realizing ultimate reality not tainted by your own psychological functions. Once you get to that point, you realize what you are is much more fundamental than this body, this mind, this self. And when you lose attachment to those things, you become so free from psychological suffering because psychological suffering is oriented within the aspects that make us human, that follow our mind, that follow our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. Once you free attachment from those things, it's just like someone who has two hands that are not wounded, right? I believe Buddha said this, but you can hold poison in your hands as long as your hands are not wounded. It's the exact same thing here. When you realize ultimate reality, you can engage in life in a way that keeps you from psychologically suffering because you take away all the roots that lead to psychological suffering because you're not attached to them anymore. That is the core takeaway here. But you will never realize this until you practice for yourself. You might intellectually get it, and that's good, that's useful, and it's nice for a certain level. But to get to the bottom, the core of what we're talking about here, you have to put these into practice yourself. I'm going to be making more videos on how to do actual practices, and I have some ideas on how to teach these things in some new ways. Because when we talk about these things intellectually, I mean, it helps you with knowledge and understanding, but really and truly, the best way I think I can teach is by direct practice. Do it for yourself and validate it. And then once you see it works for yourself, everything else kind of clicks and makes sense, right? It's like seeing the message, seeing the words, but not getting the message because you haven't done the practice and you don't have the realization. But once you have that, once you have the realization, then you see the message that's embedded in the words. That's what I'm trying to get across here. All right, so I'll go ahead and wrap things up here unless anyone has any questions. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts, anything they want to share or talk about? Happy to answer whatever. This channel is for you all. And I'll give it a few seconds here. I'll keep talking so it's not super awkward for people. If there's any questions, feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer whatever it is that people may want. If not, I'll go ahead and close things out here in just a few seconds. Again, this channel is about the psychology of awakening, finding freedom from psychological suffering, and realizing these truths in ways that you can validate for yourself. I don't want you to go off speculative beliefs. I don't want you to go off of faith. I don't want you to go off of things because an authority told you to. I want you to validate for yourself. And I'm going to give you all the tools that you need there so that you can do it for yourself and then realize. All right, any questions? We'll give it a few more seconds and then we'll close things out. All right, I'm not seeing anything, so I'll go ahead and end the chat here or the live stream here. Thank you all for those who viewed. If you have any questions later on, you're welcome to directly message me or comment in my other videos. Be happy to answer you as I can. All right, take care.